a fun job. And towards the end, like my best friend worked there with me, and she had something pinned on her that wasn't her fault, and they ended up like firing her for it, which I mean it's standard, but it was just very poor management.
Yeah, I was wondering. I was like, that's nice.
So, I think that today's lesson's gonna be shorter because there's less slides than usual. And I don't know. It kind of depends on conversation.
A lot more to talk about.
Yeah. There's a lot more to talk about with Islamic art than some of the other art. Well, I mean, there was a lot more to talk about the other art too, but we're more familiar with Christian art, so I feel like we don't need to discuss it as much because we understand what's happening in it. With Islamic, it's a little bit more foreign to everyone except for my previous class has someone literally from Iraq, and she legit won't talk.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude,
She knows
tell me. Well, I was there. Well, then tell me about it. She went to the Dome of the Rock, and this is all I got. Oh, yeah, I saw it. It was nice.
That's all she said.
Tell me more. I haven't gone. I need to know. Oh, the inside's nicer than the outside. I know that.
Well,
tell me.
you just sit her down and just get her alone.
But
Okay, let's go for coffee. We can
I
talk
think
about
that's the only way she'll probably get it.
yeah, I don't know.
She's alone.
But so I feel like we might talk a little bit more today than usual. All of the lessons this week are a little bit shorter than usual. Tomorrow's is the longest one. Romanesque is very short on Wednesday because I didn't see the point in including a lot of it because it's all the same. So I just kind of picked and chose one example of each because, yeah. But before we get started, I did want to remind you guys that this week you have your little philosophy paper over the Emancipated Spectator that you should be working on. So if you have questions about that at any point, feel free to ask. If you don't feel comfortable asking in class, you can email me and I'll get back to you right away. As for grading your quiz, I'll probably do that today because it's something that I actually want to grade. I have a lot of things to grade. All of my other classes turned in their gallery reports, and I don't want to grade them. So I generally start with the stuff that I actually want to grade before doing anything else, and I actually want to grade your quiz. I mean, I don't want to grade anything, but on the list of things, I'd rather do that than other stuff. No. It doesn't take long to grade them. It doesn't take long to read them. It's just annoying because it should be an easy 100, but they can't follow instructions. And then I have to, cause I already previewed some of them and they didn't cite things and they didn't write introductions and they didn't do stuff they were supposed to do. So yeah, that's why I don't like grading this. So I'll probably grade your quiz first. But yeah, so this week is a bit of an interesting week. Normally, we usually only do like 1 or 2 chapters. This week, we're going to do 4. That's because next week, I only want to spend Monday on chapter 14. I think 14, 15, something like that. Early Renaissance art. I know the topic. And then the rest of the week, give you guys time in class to work on your presentation. That's the plan. Yeah. Like 3 days of class time to work on your presentation. Yeah. So that's why this week's a little bit more crammed as we're going over 4 different topics. But it's almost all the same topic except for today. The rest of this week is Christian art. Today it's not. Today is Islamic art. Starting off with a little introduction into early Islamic art. To really understand Islamic art, you have to understand the religion because the art's made based. We're talking about Islamic art. We're talking about an art that is based on a religious group. versus a region or a history. So for this one, you do have to have some background knowledge on that. But we are primarily a Christian nation, so we don't really know too much about Islam here usually. It's a little bit stereotypical what we do know. So we are going to educate ourselves here at the beginning a little bit about Islam. Grace, can you see the video? It made you minimize, so I don't know. Grace. I'm gonna assume that you can see that. She doesn't need to watch it. Yes, she does.
Okay.
Yes, she does. Okay. Oh my gosh, I had it blown up and then quit. Okay. that's where we're gonna stop. Because the main things I wanted you to get were those 5 pillars. Because they're gonna pop up again and again and again. And I heard you the first time. Okay. He's a fun guy. I like it. Yeah. I watch a lot of his stuff. I watched his world history to prep for a test when I was in college. I made an A, so it works. So early Islamic art kind of spreads with Islam the exact same way they did. So Islam ends up spreading throughout the world. Each region does have its own kind of version of Islamic art and, well, Islam itself. And therefore, we will be going from region to region as we go throughout this. And we are actually going to go quite a ways into the timeline, I think all the way up to 1200. So yeah, big shift from old stuff to newer stuff. But as I said, the rest of this week we're doing Christian art, so we're going to be doing the same thing, Christian art, later. But we are starting off with the OG territory of Islam, which would be Jerusalem and Mecca is what we're going to do next. So the original, this is the Dome of the Rock. This is the first great Islamic building ever made. It is located in the seat of the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia. And it is still contested land today. Kind of ironic. I forgot that we were talking about this and we were just talking about this. Anyways, it is an octagonal central format, similar to, oh, have we talked about that yet? Yeah, San Ventali. I'm kind of like all mixed up on what we haven't talked about because I'm on a different timeline than you guys. But yes, San Vitale is also an octagon. This is another octagon. This one was built way before San Vitale was, though. And there are other Christian churches that are going to take this format and do things quite similar. The outside does boast a lot of really vivid, bright mosaics. That is new, newer. It has been redone. That is not the original. The interior, however, is almost entirely original. But some things you might notice about the exterior, we have a Roman arch, as well as Greek Corinthian columns, and a dome, which was also Roman. So these guys are familiar with what the Roman Empire was doing. Of course, the Roman Empire did stretch into this area at one point, so that makes sense. And they were incorporating some of those architectural motifs in different ways that they thought was aesthetically pleasing for themselves. You'll notice something else about Islam. They're very geometric with their patterns. They like symmetry, they enjoy geometry, and they're very precise as well. If you're wondering what these mosaics up here are, that is calligraphy. In Islam, they consider calligraphy to be an art form, which I mean, podcast again. I keep talking about podcasts. I was listening to a podcast this morning of calligraphy from China, and that was considered one of the 3 graces to be able to master. One of the 3 ideal art forms was calligraphy. So it holds a similar importance over here in Islam. It's considered a high art form to be able to master calligraphy. Of course, with their calligraphy, they aren't writing just anything. They're copying texts from their Quran, Bible version of things, the Hadith. Yeah. Very stylistic writing as well. It's not just basic, to where it literally does look like it's art. The interior, like I said, is all original. So we have columns and Roman arches again with faux marble. These are faux marble. The columns themselves are marble. This design on top, you can see how symmetrical it is, so you can kind of tell it's fake marble, because real marble is not that precise. It's a little bit more natural. Once again, Corinthian columns at the top, they are gilded in gold. There's also gold gilding in the mosaics at the top of the piers. These big block structures are piers. They're going to pop up again in architecture from now on. They're just a little bit more sturdy than columns. A lot more sturdy than columns. The ceiling is once again domed. It also has a lot of mosaics and calligraphic writing along it. And of course, in the center is the rock. That's the name, Dome of the Rock. Its importance to the Islamic religion because it's the supposed location where Muhammad ascended to heaven. And of course, Christians and Jewish people claim it because it's also the supposed spot where Abraham was to sacrifice Isaac. So that's the reason why I mentioned it was contested earlier, that every religion, major religion in the world claims it. Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. It's also the supposed location where Adam and Eve were buried. Can't prove that one. Can't prove the others either, really. It's a rock.
Yeah.
It's a rock.
Yeah, it's a rock.
Yeah, but it is cool that they designed this entire building with the rock right directly under the dome. And just to show off its importance.
Only Muslims are allowed to go inside?
Huh?
Isn't it like only Muslims are allowed to go inside?
Yes.
Yeah.
Although temporarily, when the Jewish people were in charge of Jerusalem for a brief moment, they switched it. Like I said, whenever this city changes hands, because if you keep up with world affairs, it's constantly switching to a Jewish city, a Muslim city, a Jewish city, a Muslim city. I think even Trump a few years ago said Jerusalem is Jewish. So when that happens and it changes hands, it switches who owns this.
So it might be able to be accessed now.
It might be able to be accessed now with that treaty.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, because whenever we went there, they wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to go there. That takes us into more architecture. You'll notice with this chapter and well, all the chapters that are following, we're spending a lot of time with architecture, which is nice for some people. For me, it's not. I mean, I like Islamic architecture, but Christian architecture is like, it's a church. Islamic's pretty cool though. Just because there's different floor plans than what we're used to seeing here, which is why it's a little more interesting to me. This is one of the great mosques that we're talking about today. There's a whole bunch of different great mosques. I'll preface with that. In fact, our next one's a great mosque. There's more great mosques. They're all just called great mosques. All of them. So I'll preface with that, just because this one's a great mosque doesn't mean it's the only great mosque. I found that interesting as well, going through things, because I don't think that through sometimes until I'm like seeing it over and over again, and I'm like, am I taking something wrong?
It would all be like the great, because they consider them the great.
They all consider them to be great religious buildings, so they're all the great. This one's from Damascus. Also more in the original territory of Islam where it first started. So originally the capital of, well, this religion was in Mecca, which is where Muhammad was from and where he eventually returns later in life. And Mecca, of course, if you're familiar with Islam, is the location in which they are always supposed to pray facing, as it is the holy city. Eventually, in 661, the capital was moved to Damascus, and the Umayyads, who took power, built a mosque there to, well, really celebrate the moving of the capital. They also had a palace structure built. So another little background history about Islam. Islam, when Muhammad died, there were issues as to who took over control, whether it was going to be the son or the father-in-law, I think it was. The father-in-law or the brother-in-law, some in-law. And that ends up dividing them into Sunni and Shiite Muslims. And they end up fighting over control of Islam afterwards. This is a period of time in which the Umayyad people were in control of the region. We are going to see shifts, just like everyone else that we've talked about so far, of people conquering people and stuff changing. Eventually, the Umayyads are going to be kicked out, and I have no idea if I'm saying that correctly at all. So don't go. Umayyad. I'm just guessing. I can't speak Arabic. I'm not going to pretend that I can. I am white, very white. I'm from Indiana. I'm super white. But this is just their mosque that they built. It does have the central prayer courtyard. In front is a bell tower. The bells are in existence to call people to prayer. Later on, those are going to evolve into minarets, which will be located at all four cardinal directions. You would enter in through the mihrab. The mihrab is like the domed porch area, and enter into that. Eventually, they'll evolve and have several different entrances for you to enter into, but this is an early example of Islamic architecture. They had one gate to go through, the mihrab. And the mihrab also designates the direction to Mecca. That's a standard on all Islamic buildings. And like I said, it's gonna Umayyad. Thanks, Brandon. Umayyad. I was close.
Yeah.
Later on, when they have multiple openings, the opening that denotes the direction of Mecca is going to be bigger than the others to help them determine, okay, this is the right direction. So if you ever go to Islam, you should know which direction to face Mecca so you don't insult anyone. This is a really traditional Basilica Roman format plan of a rectilinear building. They stole that from the Romans. They're going to continue on with that format for a long time. In fact, the Christians continue on with that format for a very long time. It's practical. It's a rectangular building with a large courtyard. This is like the atrium that the Romans had in their Basilica's garden. However, now it exists as a prayer area. The men would pray inside usually. The women can be outside. It's also overflow. Women were not allowed to pray inside. Even now, they pray in a separate room in a mosque, a traditional mosque.
Yeah, they don't go to church yet.
Yeah, it's completely separated. Yeah, once again, Roman arches, Roman columns, very Roman details.
Very big.
It is very big, yes. Some interior mosaics from the great mosques. Most mosques are decorated with mosaics. We talked about mosaics with Byzantium, and mosaics are also used by the Islamic people around the same time period, however, used very differently. This one is a little bit similar to Roman paintings from Pompeii that we looked at, particularly those ones that kind of tried to make it look like things continued on into space with linear perspective. This is trying to represent paradise and show different buildings as well as foliage and water. Later on, they're going to switch the mosaic style to where there are no humans or animals being depicted at all. And they try and veer away from representing foliage too, just because those are things that are created by God. And as a human, you should never try and outdo God. So they just don't usually show those things, particularly in mosques. You'll see later on objects that are owned by persons that they'll have figural representations, but anything that's denoted specifically for a major religious building is not usually going to have any of those objects on them. Once again, very similar to Byzantine art, you see that gold background with the tiles. Later on, Islamic tile is going to evolve quite a bit. We'll get to that today. Right now, they're usually using the same methods that the Christians are doing by using either small stones and pebbles or small square cut pieces of glass. Which this one's the small square cut pieces of glass. But yeah, eventually they'll switch to actually making ceramic tiles.
Are they the first to use that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Baghdad. So we've talked about other cities. Eventually, the Abbasids take over from the Umayyads, and they move the capital to Baghdad. This is a common theme in history. Someone takes over, they got to move the capital. One Umayyad is going to escape and move to a different location in Spain and spread the religion there. But when the Abbasids take over, they do move to Baghdad, and they use the old Assyrian, and I need a space there, but I can't move it with the presentation we're on. Assyrian and Persian plans of palaces. So Assyrians and Persians we've talked about before, they tend to have their palaces in the very center of the city. And this is a very cartoonish representation, but it's the nicest one I could find. With the palace in the center, and close to the palace, you would have your mosque. And just like the Persians and Assyrians, they also did have walls to protect them from invaders and everything else. So they really did copy the format of both the Assyrians and Persians, who were originally located in that same area. So another great mosque. This is the great mosque that was done by the Abbasid people, not in Baghdad, but nearby, in Kharan. This is also in a very similar format to the Roman Forum, Roman Basilica format. So you have your rectilinear building with your atrium format, but they don't call it an atrium. That's your hypostyle prayer hall is what it's called in Islamic architecture. So you enter into your mihrab, into your prayer hall, and then of course inside of the building itself is a nave with aisles, very similar to a Roman basilica. Yep, plans. They get more complex when you get into Gothic architecture. That's what I'm on. They get confusing. This is a simple one. Here is what it actually looks like from the outside. So you see your tower with your bell in it to call people to prayer, your mihrab telling you which direction you need to actually pray in. All of these great mosques that we've looked at are designed based off of what Muhammad's house supposedly looked like in the very, very first church that he hosted. Of course, they don't call it church mosque, but you get it. He had a garden in which served as the hypostyle hall or the prayer area that most people ended up praying in. He had a bell. He had the little mihrab area to denote the location towards Mecca. So all of these, there's a rhyme and reason to why it's designed the way it is. It's based off of those ancient texts that describe the first mosque. And that's why most of the others follow suit afterwards. Now, something that's different with the Great Mosque in Kharan versus the last Great Mosque from Damascus that we talked about, you might notice there's multiple doors. So there's a door over here, and there's another door over here. Like I said, they start incorporating more entrances for easy entrance and exit for mass people later on. But of course, you'll notice there's a difference between this porch and the mihrab porch. It's a little bit bigger.
On the, I guess they use that as a fortified place to.
It is very fortified.
Well, yeah, because they can't. No one can freelance up that wall because of the slope.
No, yeah. I don't know if that had to do with fortifications or not. But yeah, it is very fortified, and it's a very thick wall too.
Well, yeah,
it's a safe spot.
Yeah. Besides
the doors.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But even though there's multiple doors,
it's huge.
It's built to hold the whole city, so. Yeah. Now, some other different towers. So thus far, the different bell towers we've looked at, they're pretty square, a rectangular shape. This one's a fun one. This one's the minaret from Samarra. Later on, like I said, they developed minaret towers, which are very thin, not quite as bulky. This is an early example of a minaret. This is also known as the snail shell, which is what Malawea translates to, snail shell. Originally, when this was first found by archaeologists, people thought it was the Tower of Babel because, like, it's how it's described. So a lot of biblical representations of the Tower of Babel, if you Google it, they'll look like this. This is not the Tower of Babel, though. This is literally just a bell tower. It does have a ramp of stairs that allow you access to the top where the bell is. It's also thought that originally there was a ramp leading from the top of the bell tower to the mosque, connecting the two. Now, you might notice all of the soldiers in the picture. A good chunk of this has been messed up because of all of the fighting that has occurred in that area recently. This is located in Iraq, by the way, which sucks.
I think there's like chunks blown off of it right
Yeah,
now.
there's chunks that are missing
that's
from it
why-
right now, which sucks.
Like,
It really
like a
sucks.
bomb was-
Yeah. But it is 165 feet tall, in case you're interested, in case you care about height.
I like the thing, the visual thing.
I know, to give you like that's why I included this picture, because it was one of the few that had like people up there, but it also gave you a sense of like what it's actually like there right now. There are people that are watching it to make sure it doesn't get destroyed, but unfortunately it is suffering some damage still. A very different thing, a mausoleum. This is in Bukhara. It is made entirely of mud bricks. Yeah. And this gives you our first look at mausoleums. Mausoleums are very important for the rulers in Islam. Originally, Muhammad said that it was bad or sinful to really honor yourself in death. So Muhammad himself did not have a mausoleum. However, later rulers of these regions did have mausoleums commissioned for them to be buried in. This was the first attempt at a mausoleum for these rich, who will become later sultans. But yeah, it's really interesting, the basket weaving technique that they chose here. As well as the foliage designs. These are like see-through on the porch here. It's very reminiscent to what a mihrab would look like, just a very downsized scale version. It also has the dome, which is associated with mosques. So they're really trying to make these buildings equate to a miniature version of a mosque. Like I said, this is only our first mausoleum. There are going to be more. But it's quite impressive to think that this is all mud brick, and it's from the 10th century. It's done pretty well.
Very well.
Yeah. And now you guys are beginning to grasp why I really liked Islamic architecture. It's really interesting and impressive.
So much more.
Yeah. It also has 4 entrances. In the center, underneath the tomb directly, would have been his tomb.
All 4.
Yeah. Of course, mausoleums are going to get a lot more intricate as time progresses. This is just the first one. This is another great mausoleum. This one's from Cordoba. Like I mentioned, one of the Umayyads, Abd al-Rahman, ends up fleeing when their dynasty falls in Arabia at that point in time, and he flees to Spain and becomes the Islamic leader in Spain. Spain was Islamic at one point, very much Islamic. Eventually, it's going to be pushed down south by Ferdinand and Isabella when they go on their crusades. The same people that paid Columbus to sail the ocean blue. 14 man to do. This is considered to be the jewel of the capital. Cordoba itself was designed to be an Islamic city. Eventually, Cordoba, like I said, is going to be destroyed and taken over by Christianity, which pushes the Umayyads and the other Islamic people in Spain down to Alhambra, which we will get to later. But we're starting off here. This is another hypostyle hall plan, similar to the others that we've talked about. Of course, this one has a much more intricate bell tower. Some of this bell tower was done after, like during the Gothic era, which is why it has some Gothic elements to it. We still have our dome. It is an octagonal dome and still our very rectangular building. It's huge. Yeah, all of these mosques are gigantic. But once again, they're built to house the entire city's population for prayers because, like it mentioned in the video, everyone was supposed to pray unless you were sick or menstruating.
Yeah. Or a child.
Or a child, yes. Go children.
Okay. Very organized people.
Yeah. Now inside is more impressive. More impressive than the outside. This one also incorporates Roman arches. Later on, these arches are going to be called the horseshoe style and become synonymous with Islamic architecture. We are going to look at some Romanesque buildings that borrow them later on, but they are considered to be Islamic motifs at this point in history. Something interesting with these columns, though, is that they're double arcades of, I said columns, arches. They're double arcades of arches. So there's one smaller one and then a larger one on top, all throughout. There are 514 columns and 36 piers included. The piers are not in this picture. You can kind of see the back of one back here, though. They're big, thick blocks. Including all of these double arcades allowed for the building to become a lot more light and airier, as well as make it seem bigger. It is impressive. Once again, Corinthian columns. So we still see that continuation even over in Spain of Roman motifs in Islamic architecture. This one is, I didn't list it, 961 to 965.
Wow.
Like one of these slides, I wrote it down. I got tired of typing the same thing on every slide, so I just put it on one from now on.
How long has it been built?
4 years,
Okay.
which is pretty quick. We're going to be looking at some Christian churches later on that take several decades to build.
Like another day.
Yeah.
It took forever.
It takes forever. Some more images of the Great Mosque. This one obviously includes a lot of mosaics. We're going to see a lot of pictures of this one actually because there's several different areas that are quite impressive. This is an entrance that leads into the private chambers where the ruler would worship. They had their own private area. You'll notice the theme with that with Christian churches as well in a second. The rulers themselves had their own different location where they worshiped separate from the masses. Usually in Christian churches, it's like a gallery up above, and they could see everyone. But here they had their own private room to worship in, and this is just the entryway into that. Of course, a very defined horseshoe arch here, covered in mosaic tiles as well as calligraphy. Oof, that's a really bad picture, but it was the only one I could find. I went through hundreds of pictures trying to find this. This shows that they're not just using Roman elements and Greek elements, but they're also trying to be really creative with their architecture. Not that these didn't, they did too. But this one's quite obvious. It looks mythological, yeah. So they have their regular horseshoe arch at the top, but then they also have the sculptural motifs creating different kinds of arches in between that arch. So really interesting. Yeah, I loved this one when I was looking at it, but like I said, there's not any good pictures of this.
I guess we just have to go there and take pictures.
I know. All of them were like stock photos from Alamy, and I really hate using those. The dome on this is really cool too. It's an octagonal dome with, I don't know if I had it. Yes, I did.
Wow.
There's the dome.
It's a square with circle.
Yeah, so it's a square with two other squares inside forming an octagon. Yeah. It's very aesthetically pleasing. All of this is covered in tile mosaics, by the way.
I feel like
That's ceramic.
if it wasn't frowned upon, that would be like one place where you can just like lay on the floor and look at the
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think they'd let you do that.
No, it's
But,
not.
yeah, this is
That's
one of those
really
places, yeah.
In theory.
But this is our first instance of really literally seeing what forms an octagonal dome, which is 2 squares. They
Yeah.
didn't try and hide it. They have it as an aesthetic motif.
Is that ceramic?
I think this one might be ceramic.
Ooh.
It does look like a kaleidoscope, yeah.
That's weird.
This is really hitting home what I said earlier about them really loving geometry and symmetry. Yeah. And instead of using things like human motifs like Christian churches do on their domes, these guys are using, well, geometric patterns and foliage, which I prefer. I feel like using people kind of takes away some of the architectural emphasis on things because you're busy looking at the people instead of the architecture itself. But that's just a personal opinion. Some people really like the Christian art, like my old professor. Yeah. I'll talk about her later, not today. Here's yet another mosque. This is the Friday Mosque, located in Iran. It is the first mosque to allow 4 identical iwans, or entrances. The actual original Iwan is here for the porch. It is a little bit larger than the others, but you can see it's not just a door. It's a legit huge entrance. I also love how many domes this one has on it, as well as the pointed arches themselves. Not quite a Gothic arch, but it's still a pointed arch. Covered entirely in, this one is ceramic mosaic tiles on the outside and inside. Yeah. We're going to talk about how they do the tiles in a second.
Why are there domes only on one side?
I don't know. It doesn't say in the book, and I am not going to pretend like I know.
Oh, cool.
So if you're interested, you can Google that. Because I'm sure there's a reason.
I'll see.
Yeah. Now, moving on from mosques and buildings onto luxury arts. Like I mentioned earlier, luxury arts are a little bit different from mosques as they did include human and animal motifs because they were privately owned. They weren't meant for religious buildings. Muslims are really renowned for more than just their architecture. They're also really renowned for their luxury items, such as materials made in ivory, metal, wood, and glass. This is the pyxis, which is just a vessel, and it is obviously renowned for its carved details and the rich motifs that it includes. Once again, there is calligraphy located around the top. That inscription says, I had to write it because I couldn't remember, God's blessing, favors, and happiness to all Muhira, there we go. Son of the commander of the faithful, may God have mercy upon him this year. This was done for a prince, and his name is Al-Mughira.
Okay.
I didn't include the dimensions. Your book has it. I don't believe it was very big though, because it's ivory. It can't be
I
huge.
just wanted to ask that.
Yeah, I didn't include. I got. It was one of those like. Sometimes it was like, do I want to make the picture bigger or do I want to include the dimensions? And I'm like, this one I care more about the picture. It does have 2 lions eating boars here in the center, surrounded by, of course, the floral mandorla motif and other images of people around it. On the opposite side, it has the prince himself hunting. If you want to look at that other picture, you can find it online. Very, very detailed carvings.
Does it open?
It does open.
That's even more.
Yes. Of course, like I said, this was done for a prince, so it's not like every person would have something like this, which is why it's considered a luxury item. The wealthy members of the society would have things like this commissioned to celebrate a certain person or event. this is not normal for everyone. Now, also something not normal for everyone. I love this thing. This is an ewer, so it pours water. Yeah, it pours water. It has a utilitarian purpose. Water comes out of the beak. There's a little hole up here you can open and pour water in it. It's basically like a teapot. Yeah, you can put wire. Yeah, any liquid.
That'd be cool. I drink that.
But besides it being actual functional item, it does have a lot of copper and silver inlay. The entire piece itself is brass. I did have the dimensions on this one. It's a foot high. Also not an object made for a random person. It's meant for the wealthy to show themselves off. It also has calligraphic inscriptions upon it. If I remember correctly, this one was done for an official that served wine to the king. That was like his job. So this was to represent him and his job, which is why he chose the object that he chose. And of course, there's bird feathers on here, as well as different symbols that kind of really fit into the shape of the bird itself, working with the thing that it's supposed to represent, a bird, as well as making it look compositionally aesthetic. A bird.
No,
Not just any bird. Not just any bird, but a falcon. Oh, by the way, this was done by a specific artist, Suleiman. In case you care about the artist. Yeah. Sometimes I do care, sometimes I don't. There's a lot of Suleimans. We're going to talk about some more in a second. Suleiman the Great is the big Suleiman. This is one Suleiman. Qurans, like I mentioned earlier, calligraphy is very important to the Muslims. This is one example of a Quran. Quran themselves is, well, God's word. And calligraphy for these people is illustrating God's word. So they want it to be very beautiful and aesthetically pleasing, which I think you've already caught on to that because we've seen a few different examples of it popping up already. Interesting thing though, this form specifically is called Kufic script, which is what most of the script we've looked at so far today is Kufic. And in Kufic, they feel like vowels are not aesthetically pleasing to look at, so they don't usually illustrate those. Therefore, to represent where the vowels would be, they put a little red dot underneath it. So this is consonant. There's a vowel here. It's like Wheel of Fortune. The title chapter of this particular Quran, as well as a lot of other Qurans, is in gold leaf and ends in a palm tree finial. So this is actually a chapter title. It looks like an illustration, which I mean, technically for them, it's an illustration. It's not read this way.
Is it read,
it's read backwards?
Okay,
yeah. So not normal. Yeah. When I learned how to use ink, by the way, this is ink. My teacher got very irritated with me because I was left-handed, and we were practicing writing with like a legit ink pot and quill, and I write like this, so my hand smeared all across the paper. So I actually had to learn how to write backwards. Yeah, it sucked. He was like, "You're smearing it, so learn how to write backwards." He didn't tell me how to do it. He just said, "Learn, figure it out."
Learn how to do that.
Because he didn't want to grade my smeared paper.
Writing on the board is like,
yeah. Oh yeah. So this makes me think, wow, if only I already wrote like that, that would have been a lot easier. This is very true. Anyways, that's a fun little story there. They're also really well known for ceramics. I mean, like really any luxury art item that's kind of something that can be geometrically, aesthetically pleasing is great. Ceramics themselves, usually round objects.
That's like the way
Yeah, it's not supposed to spin, but it does look like a lazy Susan. That's what I always thought of it, because it looks like it should just rotate. It's just a really large plate. This is called, God, it's Monday. Smarkand, where was popular. Oh my God, it's a Monday morning. I don't do well pronouncing things on Mondays. It gets a little bit better as the week goes. I promise. But this is local fire dipped clay. They get the clay and then they dip it in a white slip and then they paint the calligraphy over top. Usually it's a different person that's actually doing the calligraphy part versus the person that actually made the plate. This one does say knowledge is bitter tasting at first, but in the end it is sweeter than honey. Good health to the owner of this dish.
You're not wrong.
You're not wrong. It's a proverb. These dishes would normally be decorated with little proverbs and sayings like that. It is a big dish, 1 foot across. Which, I mean, it had to be to fit all that. And you'll notice they did make sure to write in an aesthetically pleasing way around it, really covering that, making it still seem symmetrical, even though it's not exactly identical on each side. It's a lovely example of asymmetry.
Something way different than what we even tried to say.
Probably.
There it is.
Huh? Oh yeah, I'm not gonna try and say that.
Yeah. Oh, weird.
Yep, not gonna try.
You just take that word out.
I felt like it was important because it's specifically from Uzbekistan and Iran, and it's a style that spread from that location. So that's why I put it in there. Otherwise, normally I wouldn't try. But I felt like it was important. Yeah. It felt like he was like,
Yeah,
so,
they had that.
Yeah, I can't do that. I can barely roll my R's, man. So. Later Islamic art is characterized with the Mongols taking over a lot of Islamic land. Ah, the Mongols. I do love them. They're very interesting people. See, the Mongols themselves, they conquer a lot, but they don't force people to adhere to their ways, which is how Islam continues on, even though the Mongols take over. Which is a side note that I didn't plan on mentioning, but hey, now you know. That marks the beginning of the Mughal Empire. I love the Mughal Empire. Taj Mahal, yeah, it's from them. The greatest Islamic empire ever. So stuff's gonna get even cooler. All of this happens around 1192 and 1260. Like I said, because the Mongols don't force you to adhere to any of their teachings or religions, because they don't really have a religion, Islamic art does continue on. But when all of this happens is around the time period in which Islam itself becomes a bit disjointed. So there are different trends that are happening in different areas. I kind of mentioned that at the beginning already, though. Starting off with the Alhambra, like I mentioned earlier, the Islams in Spain are forced south by, well, Christians. And they decide to build a large dynasty in Spain, in Granada. That dynasty was comprised of several different palaces arranged around a central mosque. We do have a lot of those palaces. However, the most famous one is the Palace of Lions, known for the Court of Lions, which is also really cool. It had a very similar layout to Roman homes, as it was designed around a garden center with all of the rooms around it. If you remember back to Pompeii. See, now you guys are understanding why I liked this section. It's a little detour and break from everything. It's a refreshing break. So interiors of the Alhambra, here is that Court of Lions. So in the Court of Lions, there's a fountain with, I think it's a dozen lions. 4 of them have water coming out of their spouts. They signify the 4 cardinal directions. And they still function today. These little lines underneath it catch the water and carry it. And of course, it's more famous probably even for the fountain, the lovely geometric and floral designs inside of it. So the Alhambra features distinct pointed arches, as well as a lot of calligraphy and geometric patterns and floral patterns. You might not notice the calligraphy in this one because it's kind of hard to notice, but they are right here. Yeah, that's calligraphy. On every single column, on every single side of the column. Wait. Huh? It's just marble. Stone and marble.
I don't know where I'm going next.
It gets better. So in the Alhambra, a lot of the ceilings are covered in stucco. And these particular style of ceilings that look like stalactites are called muqarnas. There are about 5,000 muqarnas that have been used to create this one dome. This dome is located in this hall. I'm not going to try and say that. The dome itself is supposed to symbolize paradise or heaven.
It hurts my arm.
And there are multiple domes in this one palace that are made of these muqarnas.
They wanted to make it look like so it's super old.
Well, they wanted to make it look like heaven. It's just to us, it looks like a stalactite because it's like hanging from the ceiling. You'll notice also they have some tiles that are inserted inside to give it some color. Yeah, and there's also windows around it glinting off of the tiles that have been inserted. Otherwise, you wouldn't probably be able to really see all of this inside, but yeah, there's windows inside. This is another octagon, so a square inside of a square. Yeah, impressive. Now, our second mausoleum and our last mausoleum for today. This is the mausoleum of Sultan Hassan. Actually, no, there's one more mausoleum, the Taj Mahal itself. I think we're talking about that one in here. Maybe not. I don't remember. Everything's kind of blurring together in my mind. This shows that in Islam in the Middle East, there was a shift. When the Mongols invaded, they started making a lot more elaborate buildings. This itself is not just a mausoleum, it's also a madrasa and a mosque, all in one, located in the center of the city. A madrasa is a theological school. You would send your child there to learn about the Quran and all of the famous religious leaders that existed. There was more inside of this building as well. The school itself was paid for with tax dollars. All of the people that went there for free. They were given food while they were there and living arrangements while they attended. All of it free. There was also a program inside of this building for the poor to collect funds for them and distribute it, kind of like a cafeteria hall kind of thing. And of course, the main deal, the mausoleum itself, which is right here. And like I said, there's also a mosque inside too. But it was built around this Sultan Hassan's mausoleum. The mausoleum itself, very similar to the last one. It's basically a square with a dome on top. Of course, this one has a lot of other buildings around it attached to it to making it look a little bit more elaborate. But it's a lot bigger than the last mausoleum we looked at as well. And there's also a lot more filigree and decor items attached with this one. But yeah, it's an interesting one. This is also our first sultan. The Mamluks considered themselves sultans or princes or kings. And that happens when the Mongol or Mughal Empire starts, they start having sultans. I mean, they'd already had princes beforehand, but yeah.
That's how you say that word. On the
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The long one.
Yeah, that long one.
With the C's and the J's and all.
Yeah. It is very massive as far as the building, but it still sticks to that basic geometric plan of squares and circles and rectangles that they like. Yeah, one more empire, the Ottoman Empire. Not to be mixed up with the Ottonian Empire that you're going to learn about tomorrow. Things with similar pronunciations and letters always confuse me. I kept reading about the Ottonians later on this week, and they pop up a few times, and I was like, Ottoman? No, different thing, very different. But the Ottomans took over large amounts of territory around the 15th century and became major world powers. They loved the arts. They also loved the geometric appeal of Islamic art that already existed. They, however, did prefer centrally planned mosques, so they're going to change the mosque up a little bit. The first central planned mosque from the Ottomans was created by Suleiman the Magnificent. I kind of mentioned him earlier, in the 1520s. And it was created for Sultan Sinan. And it is considered to be the most impressive mosque.
It was created for a single individual, right?
No.
Oh.
Sinan paid Suleiman the Magnificent, who, like, he wasn't even an architect, he was in the army. And he ended up working his way through the ranks, and people realized that he was really skilled at designing buildings. So he made it into the good graces of the Sultan, who eventually ordered him to make this mosque. It is very similar to Hagia Sophia's. In fact, he was trying to outdo Hagia Sophia. That was the whole purpose of this design. They'd already taken over Byzantium at this point. They owned Hagia Sophia, but they wanted to make a better version, which, I mean, that I kind of mentioned already that last time we met, that people constantly are trying to outdo the Hagia Sophia. It's like your set standard. This is the best one, so we gotta outdo that one. It's popping up again. Just a different culture. Yeah. It was done by Suleiman. It actually was finished under Sinan's son, Selim II, but it does incorporate a massive dome that is actually higher than Hagia Sophia's. And of course, 4 minarets. Those minarets on Hagia Sophia were added after the Muslims took over. These minarets are very similar, but also bigger. They are 200 feet tall. The minarets on Hagia Sophia are not that tall. So this one, it's taller. The whole plan of this thing is taller. The entire building was created a 1:2 ratio as well. So it's very mathematically accurate. The base is octagonal. Hagia Sophia's base is rectilinear. An octagon is a lot more stable than a rectangle for a dome to sit on top of. So it's bigger, more structurally sound building than Hagia Sophia. So he did a good job. It's the peak of his career, and it's really what he's known for. It is very impressive. I know.
You know?
I know. But this one was done more recently. It was done around the Renaissance.
They're still.
But it's still really impressive.
Yeah, it's got to be
Yeah.
It would have been.
Yeah. Yeah. I keep forgetting to mention, for whatever reason, people forget about concrete. So all of these buildings are made of stone or marble. They aren't concrete. We won't remember concrete until, well, this one might be concrete. This is around the time that they start remembering how to do concrete.
If it's concrete, that would make sense.
Yeah.
How much marble would be?
Yeah.
You can melt that.
It wouldn't be structurally sound. You would need something heavier at the bottom and lighter. So this one might very well be concrete. It didn't say, but this is around the time that they remember how to do concrete again. I don't know why. No one knows why. We forgot in the Middle Ages concrete existed. So a lot of the older buildings prior to the 1500s that we're talking about are not concrete.
They're mud.
They're mud and stone and marble. Yeah. Inside of this, there is, of course, that big dome. In the center of the dome is this lovely mosaic with calligraphy. This is a tile mosaic, ceramic tile. Now, this takes me into, I think that's the next topic. Yeah. The Islamic people have two ways of doing their tiles. Number one, you make small square flat tiles and you cut them up and then you make your design. Number two, which is how most of these rounder structures are done, they make the tiles in a shaped form with the design already on them. And then you just have to fire them and hope that your design doesn't bleed, because glaze tends to do that, and then put it onto the ceiling, which is how you get these rounder shapes with shaped ceramic tiles, not flat ones. That's also how they did this. So like I said, the first type of tile is a mosaic fired tile. It's a square. The second is cuerda seca, which is where you mold the tile into the shape that you want it to be in, which, like I said, is usually done for these rounder shapes. Then fire it and then glaze it with your design and refire it. I kind of hinted at when you put a glaze on stuff, it turns into a liquid. So there is a risk of it bleeding. So sometimes you could go through this whole process and not even be able to use that tile. So it is hard and time consuming, but it's how you get these really impressive shapes and designs. Most Islamic tile work uses that second form of techniques in order to do things like this. You can't do it with just plain mosaic tiles.
Okay. It's like nowhere else.
And this is a muqarnas, an entrance portal. Yeah. Imam Mosque, located in Iran. Which the outside of this one is really gorgeous too. You can kind of see it here, but the interior is really impressive. It's got teeny tiny little flowers all throughout.
Like kaleidoscope.
Yeah. Once again, like a kaleidoscope. They really love their geometry.
Yeah, I like to smoke some stuff over there too. I know that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. I'm in farming.
So here is the exterior of a madrasa from Isfahan. Isfahan, there we go. Once again, showcasing that tile work, which combines rounded tiles as well as geometric, floral designs, and calligraphy. The text on this, like all of the other buildings that we've looked at that have calligraphy, is Kufic calligraphy. The outermost band itself lists those 5 pillars of the Islamic faith. The inside of it is kind of like a prayer niche. This is where the Quran would have been kept for the leader to take and use. It would have been on a little pedestal right in front of this saying right here. So really using the 5 pillars to encapsulate that important text. What does this one say and this one? Yeah, I don't know. It is calligraphy, yeah, but I don't know what it says. I can't read Arabic. I'm sure if you Google it, it'll tell you what it all says. But I know that this part is the 5 pillars in order. Well, not this way, but the other way. Yeah, this thing is huge.
Because like the picture makes it look really small.
Yeah, I know. The picture always makes things look small, but this thing's 11 feet high.
Yeah.
Yeah, 11 by 7, that's pretty large.
Yeah. Now, a little bit of a break from architecture again onto luxury arts from the later Islamic period. This is the Ardabil carpets. This is just one of them. It's a pair of 2 carpets. One of them is bigger than the other one. We're looking at the bigger one. This carpet is 34 feet by 17 feet. Once again, the picture makes it look really small. It was done for a mausoleum of one of the sultans, but it was done to reference a mosque interior. So the center of the carpet has that lovely little mandala. Sorry, I've been typing mandala a lot. I've been working with Christian art and they pop up all over the time. So mandala. The mandala itself is supposed to reference the underside of a dome from a mosque. And then each of these two things hanging off on the side are lanterns, which would have held things like incense inside of the mosques. Like I said, it's supposed to reference mosque. One of these lanterns is bigger than the other one. That's because when you're laying, when the carpet's laying down, it looks really far away and they look like they're the same size when it's laying down. But I mean, it's once again, 34 feet. So if it's laying down and you're looking at it, it would be the same size. This one would be the closer one to you and this one's the further one. This one's bigger. It is made of 25 million knots. Yes, it is wool and silk. So silk being a very expensive material. It does take forever to make, yes. Your book says specifically like in a 1 by 1 inch square, I think there's like 350 knots.
Unwoven?
Yes, yes.
I didn't know.
So this is just to hit home that even though the Ottoman Empire took over, they still care a lot about architecture and luxury arts. Luxury arts, this is glass.
Oh.
Yeah. This is like the first thing that I cared about. This is glass. It looks metallic. That's because of the particular kind of glaze that they would use. They tried to emulate metals with their pottery glaze and glass glaze. But it is very similar in design to those lamps that you're looking at. It was intended to hang from the ceiling and hold oil in a wick and function as a lantern. Similar to the ewer that we looked at, this one also references the owner with the eagle and the cup as to who exactly owned this particular lamp. Yeah, it's glass with some enamel glaze on it. It's cool. And because these people cared so much about these luxury items like this glass lamp, we still have a lot of them today, which is awesome because usually glass, we don't have too much. But they considered these items to be extremely important. So they took good care of them. There's more. They also did page, well, what in the Western Hemisphere we call illuminations. They just call them illustrations. This is an illustration of the poem Bustan by Sadi Ar. Pictured here is actually the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife, if you know that story. But in Arabic, it's Yusuf and Zulkhaka. But it's Joseph and Potiphar's wife. If you know the story, Potiphar tries to seduce Joseph to kind of screw him over and get him arrested, but Joseph kind of is like, no. So here you see Joseph running away from Potiphar's wife through all of these rooms. And what's really impressive about this is the detail that has been rendered to illustrate spatial differences. Like you can tell which room is which.
Abstract.
It is very abstract. So you see kind of exterior and interior at the same time. That's going to be carried over into both Chinese art and Christian art. And this is by Bisad. Bisad is the most famous painter from the Timurid dynasty. Fun stuff. Wait, there's more. This is Safed Shahamana. The successor to the Timurids, the Safavids, took over. They were also very important patrons to the arts. This is one book that was commissioned by Shah Tahmasp. It's a 742-page book. Unfortunately, it's not entirely all together now. Western archaeologists and collectors split it apart because they consider every single page to be a masterpiece. So it's now auctioned off page by page. So good or bad, number one, they consider them all to be so special that they're individual artworks alone. They don't need to be all together. But on the other hand, we don't have the entire book anymore. It does recount Muslim history. This is just one page that depicts the Gumars, which are the first kings of Iran. Here is the head King Gumar and his two sons next to him on the mountains beside them, and all of their attendants and followers. And Gumar is supposedly supposed to have had the power to tame animals. So there's some animals in here too. Amazing what I can remember sometimes. I didn't think I'd be able to remember that.
Like resembling like almost like
I think this one's gorgeous. Yeah, like it's back to Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
It's a gorgeous kind of abstract watercolor painting. And I might skip some because we only have time for one more piece. Oh yeah, we can just talk about this one. No, I'd rather talk about this one. I like this one more. So eventually Christians during the Crusades and their pilgrimages, which we're going to talk about those later, will make their way into Islamic territory, going to Jerusalem and Bethlehem to explore those original cities mentioned in the Bible. And on their way, it was really popular to pick up souvenirs. So a lot of souvenirs like this would be commissioned or bought by Christians. So here we see a lovely combination of Islamic motifs and style with Christian iconography. And since we are talking about Christianity tomorrow again, it's a lovely little segue piece. So you still see your lovely little symmetrical design here, but instead of geometric shapes and floral motifs, we have people. Because this is telling the story of Mary and Christ. So in the center here, you have Mary. On her lap is Christ enthroned. They have angels surrounding them. And then along the way, you have different sections of the Bible, such as the presentation at the Temple of Jerusalem, where like Christ goes to the Temple of Jerusalem for the first time as a kid, as well as other different stories. Most people think that's because the person that, well, whoever went on this trip probably went to Jerusalem and Bethlehem, since it's telling stories from those two cities. And this would not have been your normal souvenir. This was one that was commissioned and paid for by a wealthy person, which you can kind of tell. I mean, it's made of silver. That's not a cheap material. It's brass with silver inlay. It is a canteen, so it would have held water. Now, in the center, there is Arabic text around Madonna, and it promises eternal glory, secure life, and perfect prosperity, and increasing good luck to whoever owns that canteen, which is now in a museum. So maybe it's the museum's good luck.
That's cool.
Yeah. Along the ways, even though the Crusades are very bad for Muslims, like super bad, we still see them taking advantage of the tourism and incorporating other styles into what would be their own art, but still carrying over their motifs. Like this still looks very Islamic. And if you're interested in this, you can look it in the book. It was stolen by the French and used to baptize kings, well, princes. They didn't call them princes though. They called them dauphins. But yeah, an interesting one. Now, in summary, what cultures do you think influenced Islamic art and architecture?
Not Rome at all.
Not Rome at all, yeah.
I mean, there's Roman.
Rome, Greece, China with their calligraphy. Later on towards the end to get money, Christians.
Thailand. I mean, they probably even had.
Yeah. They probably associated with them. The Mongol Empire stretched from China into Arabia, so it was pretty big. So yeah, I would say Rome, Greece, China, maybe a little bit of Christian towards the end. Well, I mean, Islam is still a thing. It's not like it's not ended, but you get the gist. It's the end of today's lesson. How did they make all of those styles their own? What did
a little bit like
That
repetitive, but they interpreted that their own stylistic choices to it. You know,
they added
they-
their own stylistic
ceramic.
choices.
Style.
I'd say the big ones were caring about geometry and symmetry a little bit more than the others,
The octagon.
a little bit more than the Romans and the Greeks. Like they cared about that stuff, but not to this extent. Also removing imagery of humans and animals and using different things as motifs and decor. In what ways do you see Islamic style influencing other cultures? That's a more complicated question.
Has a big, I think it has a big effect in that the Central Asia area.
Yeah.
It has.
It's going to have a much bigger effect in China and India than Western, which is why you guys are probably having more issues coming up with stuff. Some Christian churches are going to take some of those central plan formats that they were using more prominently and use them, but not for a while. Gothic architecture is going to take some of the motifs from like minarets in their towers, trying to make them tall, big, and pointy. So we do see some of it in Western, but it's much more prominent in India and China, just because Islam spreads further that way. Kind of gets a halt put onto it in the West.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, we are doing early medieval Europe, meaning we're starting off with the Vikings and working our way into Christianity spreading north. Vikings. We don't have too many artifacts from them, but we have some.
They stole a whole bunch of
Yeah, they stole a whole bunch of
They
stuff.
just stole it and traded.
Yeah. They did do cool art though. What we do have is really cool.
Like their boats and stuff.
Yeah.
Very cool.
But I'll see you guys tomorrow. Remember, you guys have that paper to write. I'm sorry that I'm reminding you.